You're listening to the AE Alignment Podcast. Every episode, a new conversation about the ideas, research, and people shaping the future of AI alignment. Let's get started. Welcome to the AE Alignment Podcast. I'm your host, James Bowler, Head of Research Partnerships at AE Studio. I'm joined today by my guest, Adriana Calejo, our Director of Government and Strategic Partnerships at AE Studio, here to talk about the intersection of AI alignment and national security. Before working at AE, I had very limited exposure to working with the government or even thinking about national security. And Adriana has been an amazing person to help me realize just how much overlap there is between AI alignment and the intelligence community. And one thing that we're trying to do at AE is communicate to folks in both the AI alignment and national security arenas that we need to engage with one another more to make progress on our shared goals. So I'm really excited to talk to you today. Welcome to the podcast, Adriana.
Thank you so much for having me, James. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today.
Awesome. So I would love to start with you just telling everyone a bit about your career in the intelligence community and at DARPA. Your journey to joining AE.
Sure. So I actually started in the intelligence community at the CIA. That's the Central Intelligence Agency, not the Culinary Institute of the Arts. Back in the late 90s, it was right after I finished my undergraduate degree in economics. And so I started as an economic analyst, moved over here to DC. And to be blunt, I was really probably the worst analyst the agency ever saw. It just really wasn't a good fit for me. And I was going to resign in 2001, and then 9/11 happened. I remember sitting in my cube at CIA headquarters that day, and my cube had these windows that overlooked one of the parking lots. And I remember standing at those windows and just watching hundreds of people run out to their cars because they were trying to get out to their loved ones. Nobody knew where the fourth plane was, and understandably, everybody was very scared and very upset. And my family had immigrated to the United States in the 1960s and 70s. And, America had done a lot for my family. I mean, we came here with nothing, and we were by no means rich, but we had tremendous opportunity that we didn't have where we came from. And I remember thinking, that day as I watched all these people running out, it was my early 20s, and I was like, not while I have a breath in my body will this ever happen again. The next day, that was a Tuesday morning. Wednesday, the government was closed. And Thursday, I came back to work at CIA, and myself and a very large group of officers, we all pivoted to work the counterterrorism mission. And, in the early days, we didn't have very good tools, and we had a phenomenal amount of data. Data science, data analytics was not something that was widely used in the government. Part of my economics background, I had done a lot of work in statistics, which I really, really liked. Those foundations actually lent themselves very well to understanding how to manipulate data, how to find patterns and unobvious information. That's a word. And so I threw myself into counterterrorism, yada, yada, yada. And I ended up pivoting toward operations at CIA. I worked abroad for many years. I worked domestically for many years as well. After many years in counterterrorism, probably about a decade or so, I pivoted toward counterintelligence, and I spent many years working counterintelligence and peer adversary issues. I'll just say that because that's a much more sensitive topic. And it was in the course roughly of that job, of that type of work, that I really kind of started to see how our peer adversaries were catching up to us in many ways, how they were actually exponentially accelerating where they were meeting us on different types of capabilities. And we're looking at it from, defense of national assets, defense of national security, our U.S. government posture overseas. And it was pretty stark, that gap, how rapidly it was closing. And as a result of that, I started really leaning much more into technology. I didn't have a technology background. My degrees are in economics and security policy studies and all this kind of softer subjects, if you will. And I started working with DARPA in 2019, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. For those of you that don't know what it is, DARPA is a part of the Department of War, formerly the Department of Defense. And that's really where some of the most groundbreaking research occurs in the United States, certainly within the government. But their sponsored research actually has been responsible for so many things that you know about, like, the internet, stealth technology, but a lot of things that you may not really know about, like noise canceling headphones, Siri, and little things like that. So, I started working with DARPA because I had a former colleague who had resigned from CIA and pivoted to a career over at DARPA. And it was just extraordinary, the types of technologies that I was seeing there. And unfortunately, there was this huge gap because you had all these brilliant minds at DARPA. They're brilliant, they're creative, they're tenacious. It's actually extraordinary how few people there are like that. You have a lot of really brilliant people, a lot of really creative people, a lot of really tenacious people, but to package all of that into one, it's actually harder to come by than one would think. And they're doing all this amazing work, and understandably, they don't have operational experience. It's not what they're hired for. So they're throwing all of these Hail Marys, if you will, but kind of not really necessarily hitting their targets because their trajectory might be off because they just don't know what the end user experience is like. And frequently, many people in the end user world, if you will, are great about setting requirements over, but not the conditions around those requirements. Like you can tell somebody, like, I need a ball or I need a pen, uh, but that's it. And then, oh, it's a blue pen. It needs to write underwater, and it needs to be, hardened to live on the sun or something like that. So I ended up, because I had a lot of experience working with the military and, in an interagency manner throughout my career at CA, I ended up really enjoying that work, kind of bridging that gap between really brilliant, creative people and then the operational end users on the other side. And myself as an operational end user and somebody that I just like talking a lot to different people, I find a nice niche for myself. And so I did that work. I had other responsibilities at CA at the time. I was working for the director of operations then, but was able to successfully lobby to create a CIA representative position over at DARPA. And in 2022, I became DARPA's intelligence community liaison officer. For those of you guys that are not familiar with liaison officers, or LNOs, as they call them in the government, basically your job is to represent your home organization to this other organization. So at DARPA, I worked for the director and the deputy director, and I represented the intelligence community in that forum, working across all the different technology offices, understanding what the requirements were from my community and what my community in the IC can bring to the table, and then working with the program managers to either help them find opportunities for technology transition, helping provide more nuance to the requirements so that when the end user sees it, they actually understand it, recognizing that they're not at the same technical level that the DARPA program managers are. But then also bringing intelligence community resources to DARPA. DARPA is supposed to be, they were created right after Sputnik. Their whole goal is to create and prevent strategic technological surprise. And so in the intelligence community, obviously, we collect a lot of sensitive information. And my goal was to bring some of that information to DARPA. So the program managers, when they were going to be building something, they would know that it was truly state of the art, that an adversary hadn't already developed something or didn't already have a defeat for it. It just wasn't publicly available information. So I kind of straddled those two worlds. Also did a lot of work in counterintelligence during that time in terms of having a good appreciation for how adversaries actually target the U.S. emerging technology sector, certainly at DARPA, but then also across the private sector, to be blunt. Um, you know, Sometimes you don't have to be the most creative person in the room. You just have to be best able to be a fast follower and diffuse it and get it to market before everybody else. And you actually win. It doesn't matter if the seed wasn't yours. Nobody really cares about that, to be blunt. So, so that was my career, and I retired early in 2025. So I left DARPA last summer, and we always say at DARPA, like, you need a series of small miracles to actually make your program work. And I kind of joke that it was through a series of small miracles that I met AE Studio. DARPA is my happy place. It was an amazing job. I love to be around the energy of that organization and really contributing to mission with my unique skill set. And I was looking for someplace similar, a place that I could still contribute to the national security mission, which is very important to me. But I also really wanted to work with people that were really creative and that were really tenacious and that were really smart and could still teach me a lot of things. And I can work with them to actually, like kind of kung fu their like crazy brilliant ideas into something that actually is applicable in the national security space. And so I met AE last fall and yada, yada, yada. Here we are.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's a great story, and the fact that you've been defining your own role for a while now, I think is really fun. Since joining DARPA, or figuring out your own kind of like liaison role there is, yeah, that's great. Cool. I'd like to talk a bit about how DARPA and the intelligence community, and maybe the U.S. government more broadly, is thinking about AI right now. Obviously, some situations with Anthropic are kind of front of mind in the news right now, and that covers mostly the Department of War. But maybe you can talk, maybe starting with DARPA, around how they see AI, and also how AI alignment in particular is of interest to folks there.
Sure. So, you know, obviously AI has been exponentially accelerating over the past several years. And I remember while I was still at DARPA, some of the conversations there, they're very worried about preventing strategic technological surprise because they do believe that there is still strategic surprise awaiting us in AI. But it's kind of hard to forecast what that landscape is going to look like. And DARPA is still a part of the government, as creative as they are, and they just don't have the same amount of money that the private sector has to throw at AI. And so I think it becomes, because there is so much money and so much talent in the private sector, it's really kind of hard to figure out where you can be value added. And I think issues around what at DARPA we would call trustworthy AI, secure AI, was really where there was a lot of more folks leaning into that, formal methods. How can you start playing better in this space? Because it didn't seem like the private sector was, at least the big frontier labs, were really focused on that as much as the government would require for true national security application of a lot of these technologies. So DARPA really started to lean into that space. And I think also in novel architectures, there's a lot more to AI than LLMs. And why everybody has put all of their money betting on LLMs, it seems kind of foolish, but it is what it is, right? That's where the train is going. So I think finding those other pathways that can get you to achieve similar or better compute uh, way more efficiently, whether it comes to, power or other resource investments in it with security inherently built in. Those are the types of, I guess, like paradigms that places like DARPA are looking at. And, the work that DARPA does spans everything from pure research all the way through applied research. So, it just kind of depends where in that spectrum you fall, which slice of that pie you want to take. And I'm not saying that that's what DARPA is pursuing right now. They have their own office directors setting their own agenda for the next few years. But these are just my observations based on my experiences there and my continued engagement with the agency. As far as the intelligence community is concerned, anytime that you're moving into places that have classified information, that entails a tremendous amount of data restrictions that I don't think people appreciate. Like, for example, like ChatGPT or Claude is not just going to be picked up and dropped in a secure or top secret environment and just there you go. Like that is actually technically not possible to happen. Nor should it for security reasons. In the intelligence community and across the government, we always are worried about things like insider threat. Either you have a person that is a bad actor, or you have malware code, an advanced persistent threat, an APT, or something in your network that could cause problems. And so when you start aggregating data together, you just make it that much easier for somebody to steal it. And that is kind of central to making LLMs work. So I think just, again, I just don't think it's going to be possible to just take one of these models and drop them in. So I think it's when we start getting into really more interesting work where you're looking at, how do you compute on the encrypted data? How much less efficient is that? Because it inevitably will be, but are there ways that we can kind of achieve better efficiencies through that while enabling or maintaining data security? I think there are really interesting questions around that are happening in the intelligence community and certainly at DARPA as well. Um, I'd say the IC, I mean, we're very much interested in, and the IC is 18 government agencies. It's not just the CIA. It includes the NSA, the FBI, all the services have an intelligence sector, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So we all have like kind of different parts and different types of data that we're working with. But everybody's looking at certainly defense, how we can use AI to do our jobs better. When you're looking at places like NGA, the National Geospatial Agency, Geospatial Intelligence Agency, right? They're looking at imagery. As you can imagine, that's just a huge volume of data that you have to weed through to try to find that needle in a gigantic haystack. They have different requirements for AI than other organizations that, maybe you're looking at the National Security Agency, NSA, where they're kind of pulling in foreign language data and they've got to like triage across, Russian, Farsi, Mandarin, Spanish, French, all these other languages to try to like figure out like what matters. But as you can imagine, the compute requirement is different for full motion video as it is for just you know, perhaps just written text even in some cases. So I think these are kind of some of the challenges that the intelligence community and I'd say the government writ large is struggling with as you look at how to incorporate AI into actual mission. There's certainly support to mission where AI could be useful. This is things like, budgets and finances, personnel, logistics, and things like that that can certainly benefit. I think those are easier nuts to crack, though, than the actual data and that type of compute. Um, and so there's all of this figuring out how we use it. And then there's also like the defensive component to it as well, right? I think a lot of agencies are trying to figure out how they can better support defense of the technology that in the technology advances that are occurring in the United States. That's I think an ongoing process and requires a level of trust on both sides of the fence and TBD if we'll get there. And then obviously, I mean, you can just kind of like walk the dog in terms of, and I won't get into too many details, but, offensive use of AI in terms of influencing other people's models, not weapons necessarily. We can chat about that as well if you like. But I think those are the general themes that I certainly have heard in the government.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've both been you've been part of these conversations for a long time. In the last 6 months, we've both been on some of the same conversations with folks at DARPA around these topics. One thing you mentioned was the idea that LLMs are not the totality of AI. And yeah, I think it's maybe worth pointing out that so LLMs are fundamentally a result of the transformer architecture. That's kind of like the key technical breakthrough that enabled all of the scaling laws and things like that to make LLMs really, really powerful. But that same architecture has many components to it and can be changed in various ways to, just like a simple example would be, rather than simulating text, you can simulate the signals that are produced by kind of, arbitrary devices, so that now instead of being a large language model predicting text and writing the next token, you're producing signals that simulate the kind of signals that you might get from any number of different devices. So that right there is like a very simple and something that we are exploring, a really simple kind of thing that you can do with the transformer architecture that was not possible 5 years ago. And so all of the what was considered frontier AI 5 years ago, pre ChatGPT, let's say, that's now not talked about and is considered maybe old school AI.
Mhm.
That's still relevant, and there's various nuances on the current kind of like frontier architectures that can apply to different domains. And I think like that's something that I've really picked up on in the calls and conversations that we've had with folks in the space, that there is just like a massive world to explore there beyond just ChatGPT.
No, absolutely. And I think to pull that thread a little further, there are what we talk about frequently is the unknown unknowns. And, I know I'm quoting an old politician about that, but that's The truth is that adversaries are very active within the United States. I mean, certainly you have technical activity occurring abroad, directly targeting U.S. infrastructure or U.S. targets, whatever the case might be. I mean, we saw that from Salt Typhoon and the targeting of the U.S. telecommunication industry. That I don't think people realize how bad that is, or how deep that goes, and its persistence. But there's a lot of other stuff happening here, and figuring it out, like pulling those needles out of the haystack. I think this is to your point of like how you might be able to predict signals. Those types of things help filter out potential leads from just random noise. So I think that there's a lot to be done in that space.
Yeah, that definitely. My mind has been open up to all of these things recently, and definitely rings true from what I'm hearing. Maybe the other thing I wanted to talk more about, and you mentioned kind of trustworthy AI. I think you used some other words there. And like the trustworthy AI is something that is very front of mind, I think, in folks in government. How can we have artificial intelligence systems that we can trust? The way that right now, maybe we feel like we can trust, certain humans that work for these organizations, that we just can't trust AI systems. And there's good reason why that's the case, because of, both, the technical architecture as well as just the results. There's like many cases that can be reported on where AI systems are engaging in, or can be made to engage in blackmail, or can be have their data poisoned and cause them to kind of like trigger certain adversarial behavior under certain circumstances. And so like the idea of trustworthy AI is very front of mind, I think, for folks in the government. And we at AE talk about AI alignment. And we're here talking about, how do we prevent AI systems from being deceptive? How do we make sure that they are aligned with human values? It turns out we're talking about exactly the same thing here.
Yeah.
Which is maybe surprising, and I'd include myself in kind of a group that before being exposed to this world, I wouldn't have understood the overlap that exists between folks in the national security space who really care about trustworthy AI, and folks in the AI alignment community that care about aligning the AI, and the fact that we really do have a lot of shared goals here. And there's obviously, as you mentioned, there's sensitive topics on both sides, potentially, like aligning with whose values in particular, or to what extent are we happy letting these AI systems provide autonomous function within national security environments. So there's I think sensitive topics on both sides, but there's a massive set of shared goals, which from my perspective, it would be great to pursue those goals together with the government. And that's, I think, one thing that we're trying to do at AE, is to find those common goals, and continue to pursue them together. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this topic, maybe coming at it more from the, primarily from the kind of government and national security side, and now being increasingly exposed to the AI alignment community. Yeah, you have any other kind of hot takes on that?
I have lots of hot takes.
I love that. Let's go.
Yeah, so I think I would add, as part of the trustworthy, like in my mind, it is secure and it is also reliable, right? And it's unbiased. Those for me are kind of like, I'm sure that there are more words that I could think of if I had more time and a martini, but those are kind of like the three things that really stick out to me. And I think kind of coming back to the government, autonomous weapon systems. So autonomous weapon systems have been around for like a super long time, right? It just depends on like where the autonomy takes over. Um, and I think that a lot of that nuance was lost in the media with all the recent scandals. And I think if people actually stop and actually understand the realities of how these decisions are made, they'd understand that this is about shades of gray. It's not none of this is black and white. Um, so uh, I guess at the intersection of AI and national security, I mean, it's not just weapons systems. It's not just war, right? It's also, I think, the prevention of war. And that's really the role of the U.S. intelligence community, right? Is how you can collect intelligence that can inform the U.S. government to give us enough information that we can take actions that will prevent war, or if we end up going to war, that we will end as quickly and as painlessly as possible. That's the theory, right? The practice, I'm sure I'm going to get destroyed if we're like, oh, what about this and what about that? You're absolutely right, right? It's like I said, it's shades of gray. It's intention and reality. But I actually took a few notes on this because I did want to also mention that when we talk about national security, it's also the protection and the, I guess, enhancement of critical infrastructure. This includes making sure that you have safe water to drink, that you have reliable power, that you have secure financial institutions. It also includes on that line economic defense of the US's dominant position in global capital markets. And also, I mean, we talk a lot about freedom of speech, but I'd say that, trustworthy AI and aligned AI, it's also AI that allows access to unbiased and unmanipulated information. So you as an individual have the freedom to make informed choices, right? And from the government perspective, this becomes really important when we talk about election security, right? And, you can read what you want, and I'm sure there are like a million conspiracy theories about that. But, you know, these are all these are some of like kind of like, for me at least, some of the basic things that when I'm thinking about national security and the importance of trustworthy, reliable, secure, unbiased AI, these are all the places where that fits. And I'd argue that that is the same thing as aligned AI because that's what we want, right? I mean, we don't go as far as saying, the system is going to be conscious and it's going to be able to do its own thing, right? And run away with itself. That's, I think, it's a step beyond. But I think if you have these fundamental things in place, right, what comes after, it's kind of like raising a child, like it should become more aligned, right? Or that drift away from alignment should be much further afield as a parent, you can do your best job to raise a child. And, when they become an adult, you kind of cross your fingers and you hope for the best.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, for sure. I think the the government and all of these arenas, whether it's national security or even like Department of Energy or pick your favorite government department. This is where, to some extent, the rubber hits the road with AI, and people are concerned, I think, about AI impact on job loss or AI impact in various aspects of their life, and getting this right in the government domain is to me one of the most critical domains, and also one of the domains where there's maybe like the most unpreparedness in some sense, and even really basic things, really basic functions that the government runs aren't set up right now for success in terms of kind of managing this transition over to an AI enabled future that certainly all signs seems to point to we're heading towards. And I would like to think that our team at AU Studio can do what we can to support this transition in kind of all aspects of the government, because I think right now just getting more kind of competent, well-educated folks into the space to kind of be in these key decision-making roles is going to be really important for us to actually navigate this successfully. So that's, yeah, I think this is like lots of things in this space where maybe folks who have thought very hard about AI alignment and often think about it maybe quite theoretically, I think would benefit from thinking about how the rubber's going to hit the road here, and how we are currently set up or not very well set up within the government and within these different national security environments. And whether kind of regardless of where people would or would not draw lines, I think hopefully most people can agree that it would be good to have decision makers who actually like really understand the technology, being able to make the decisions, because right now I think we're not necessarily set up for success there. Yeah, curious if that resonates with you based on your more real experience than my very limited experience in the government.
No, I completely agree with you. I think for me, one of the big things that set AE apart from other places that I could have gone to work is that AE is bootstrapped, and because of that, can offer a more objective, independent assessment of different things. Um, as opposed to some of, certainly in the DC area, it's the defense industrial primes or the big defense industrial base. And there's lots of AI companies of like questionable um, skill and security that are, raised a ton of capital to try to get this thing off the ground and make a lot of money. And, in the government and in the private sector, regrettably, security is the first thing to go out the door when budgets need to be made, right? And so I think you end up with entities that they have a lot of money and they have a lot of power and they have a lot of influence because they know a lot of people. But they've also kind of made these choices that they had to make for profit-driven reasons. And they have to continue to advance that line because that's how they keep their valuation up, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I'm going down an economic path here, right? But those guys, unfortunately, frequently have the loudest voices in the room because they have the most money. And I think it's really important for the government to have objective, independent voices that are actually influenced by technical expertise, true and technical expertise, not a shareholder who knows nothing about technology and doesn't necessarily care to know. They just want to make sure that they're making X return on their investment. And I think that's a key role, and not just for AE, but I think for a lot of other companies and academics and individuals that I've met in the alignment communities. The train has left the station. It's gonna go, right? And it just depends, like, do you want to help influence which way it's going to go, right? When you think about strategic long-term objectives, certainly there are going to be things in the road that are going to piss you off. It's inevitable, right? It's just the nature of the beast. Um, but do you want to be a productive part of that conversation? And I think that in my experience, there is space within the government. They want to hear people, right? They want to hear these voices. Um, but you have to kind of come in and be productive, right? Like, I always used to say that, like, if you don't vote, don't complain. I don't want to hear it. And I would say it's the same thing in the alignment community, like, I mean, super, we need people that are doing fundamental research and like keep on going with that. But if you really want to be a voice for change, it's important to be able to talk productively with people that you disagree with. Those are actually the most important conversations in any part of life. Um, and so being able to sit across the table from somebody who perhaps you disagree with their politics, but you actually have the same objective. And I think you need to recognize that, and you can find common ground to move forward. Um, so, yeah.
Well, yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. It's definitely um definitely echoes with my experience as well. I think again, I include myself in this. You maybe don't want to think about like national security implications of the technology. Certainly, if I was working at a frontier AI company, I think I would be doing my best not to think about these things because it's difficult, right? It's gonna weigh on your mind as soon as you go down that rabbit hole. But you know the implications of just ignoring it are, I think, worse. These are difficult things that we have to wrestle with. And like you say, you can either you know sit there silently being frustrated, or you can try and engage productively. And yeah, I think there is a really surprising amount of common ground here within the topic of AI alignment that everyone can get on board with from all of these different areas.
Yeah, and again, I will kind of go back to my prior examples, right? Like, it's okay to like be angry about AI as it applies in a wartime footing. I get it. Respect everybody's opinion on that. But, when your water becomes undrinkable, I live in the DC area and it's not related to AI, right? But we had this like big like sewage line break and dump like millions of gallons of raw sewage into the Potomac, right? That affects everybody. So, whether it's something happens to the water supply and all of a sudden you can only drink bottled water because there's been some compromise there, or you start having rolling brownouts, or you try to go to the hospital, but there's been some, AI-enabled cyber attack on the hospital and you can't get medical care. All of those things are part of national security. It's a messy web. It's not just war and conflict. And I mean, certainly I think we should be working to prevent war. Um, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah. Um, cool. Okay. Maybe one other thing that was kind of eye-opening to me was to understand a bit more about how the let's say Department of War and the kind of intelligence community, or IC more broadly, is thinking about AI. There are a lot of extreme timelines that are thrown out there in terms of, when will we have AGI, artificial general intelligence, or ASI, artificial superintelligence. Some people might say as soon as 2027 is when we might start to see those things, depending on your definition. I'm curious, how do you think the maybe the Department of War or different agencies are thinking about these timelines and the implications um, for themselves. And yeah, how does this impact their day to day? Are they kind of sticking their head in the sand, trying not to think about it? Are they like really actively trying to engage in this? How would you describe maybe there's a spectrum of sentiments here, but how would you articulate how the DOW and associated agencies are thinking about timelines?
Yeah, 2027 is the big year. That's also for years been the date that we think, or the year that the government thinks China's going to invade Taiwan, and that war in the Pacific is going to break out. So I'd say a lot of the government has been far more preoccupied with that than they have been worried about AGI or ASI. You know, I think that the wild card in all of this is human behavior. I think it becomes difficult, like when you look back, historically, the same way that mutations in biology sometimes like randomly appear because of a pressure and they kind of completely throw off like the continued evolution of a species. I think that's kind of like the truth also with AGI or ASI. I mean, maybe I've maybe I've been gardening too much this weekend, but I think, humans kind of do very unpredictable things, and you never know where something might come out of left field that could completely derail where the technology is trending. So I would say that in my experience, there are not a huge amount of people in the government that are worried about AGI, ASI in 2027. Again, there are other conflicts that people have for many years felt are far more real in that time frame. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are people that are deep in AI in the government that are much more cognizant of that. But I'd say it's in the minority.
Of course, these things are super entwined, right? Like the implications of any conflict in Taiwan on the supply chain for all of these AI buildouts
Absolutely.
is very clear. So even if people are thinking about these things, kind of focusing on different things, these are not independent events at this point. Um, and maybe you can say a bit more as well around the autonomous weapons point. I think like one thing that's maybe lost in the conversation, it's often framed as like, should the U.S. develop, let's say, AI-enabled autonomous weapons? And as you said, some of these things already exist, but maybe we're talking specifically here about something that is only possible as a result of kind of like, the latest frontier AI. It's often talked about in isolation, like should the U.S. develop these things or not? And maybe you can help to like, articulate what this decision looks like from the DOW perspective, because this is not like an independent decision that has to be taken. It's obviously, um, you know, what happens if the U.S. would choose not to do this and an adversary were to choose to develop this? Maybe you can kind of like present the reality of what a decision like that to pursue or not to pursue this technology looks like. And again, I like listeners can make their own mind up about what the right thing is to do here. But I would love to hear from you, how you think this kind of decision is thought about, and what is being weighed up in the minds of people who are making those decisions.
All right. I'm taking notes because I have lots of thoughts on that. So you may need to like prompt me again.
Yeah.
So I think I'll start with kind of what I would argue is almost like the simpler of a very, kind of sensitive and complex question about the use of AI in autonomous weapons. So, there's lots of types of weapons. Some of them are lethal, some of them are not. You have actual, physical kinetic weapons that result in death and destruction. And then you have electronic warfare and cyber and other things like that that create different types of effects that certainly could result in lethal consequences, but not necessarily. So there's a whole spectrum of weapons. I mean, we can just start with that. Um, in my experience, right? I mean, I worked in national security for 27 years. Um, Lethal operations, there is always a human in the loop. The government, in my extensive experience, it is very much anti-ethos of the government and probably anti the rules of war to say, hey, we're going to send a bunch of drones to country X and it's just going to start indiscriminately killing people. Or we're going to let it choose who to kill and what to drop bombs on. Like that that is very anti the ethos of the United States government. Um, and I'm very confident in that. Um, Again, autonomy and AI enabled. I'm sticking right now into like the more kinetic stuff at this point. Um, I I would say definitely a lot of it, when you're looking at, for example, automatic target recognition, that is something that enables a lethal operation, right? But it enables precision in that lethal operation so that when you do it, it's not just a person, a human's eyes and brains. You have a system that's backing you up to validate, yes, in fact, we have now quadruple checked, not just against human brains, but against the machine brain, that this is the target that is necessary to strike. And then, you proceed with whatever is going to happen. Um, I find that that is something that is something that the government has been doing for a long time. If you look at, for example, like air defense command and control, things like that, right? These are things that have, multiple human brains, and the computers, the machines give you triplicate confirmation that if you're going to conduct some type of kinetic activity, it is in fact what you want it to be to the best degree possible. There's going to be minimal collateral damage. Um, so I think that's what AI brings to the table. And I think that people worried about like robot armies that are on their own, or the US government just sending out unleashing a bunch of drones on the world. I think that's more sci-fi than actual reality. I think that by participating in that space, you're actually helping people make more precise and informed decisions about lethal activity. You're not enabling indiscriminate lethal activity. Quite the opposite. You're preventing indiscriminate lethal activity. Um, and so I think that you have to appreciate that nuance um, as you kind of start to wrestle with the question of how do I feel about AI and autonomous weapons, let's say kinetic weapons. When you get into, cyber, EW, electronic warfare, things like that, I mean, I, I'd say again, I'm trying to think of I can't say a lot on that topic for a range of reasons. But I'd say it's the same thing, right? Like you you are hoping that, or you're not hoping, but that's the intent of the government, right? Is that these things help the human make better informed decisions at a speed that can help it be impactful. And I think this kind of like leads into your second question, where like, what if the U.S. doesn't use this, but our adversaries do use this? Um, I mean, they're just gonna do it to us, right? They're gonna be arguably, they're gonna be better at destroying what they wanna destroy of the United States or the West, right? Because they're probably gonna go after the US and its allies. And we're gonna be worse at defending against that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's I guess, a lot of overlap with the kind of nuclear deterrent argument here, right? Maybe,
Yep.
would it be better for us to live in a world where the US does not have nuclear weapons, and all the other parties that currently do have that capability still do? Yeah, I think that's something to think about, right? What would the impact of that be on global security and the ability of some of these, the folks who do have access to that technology to kind of um, use those in ways that currently they're not doing, because they would then have they would not have the same adversarial threat at that level. So um, yeah, I think these conversations just like are often painted as very, very black and white. And yeah, certainly myself, I don't think I have the same like firsthand experience that you do, or that others do. But I think that the conversation is much more nuanced and is kind of being had out there on X, for example, of these decisions being very clear cut. Because I could equally imagine some folks being concerned around the slippery slope, like what seems like sci-fi now, based on some people's very aggressive AI timelines. That might be what gets them very concerned. And again, I'm not. My goal here is to not kind of wave away any of those concerns. It's just to kind of encourage people to think about what the kind of reality of these situations is for those decision makers, and their implications in both directions, whether you do choose to take these decisions or not. But there are certainly, I think it would be would be unreasonable to assume that some of the US's adversaries who maybe have a history of, you know, treating folks in their regimes with different values from what we treat in the US, it would be, I think, unreasonable to assume that they are not going to pursue these things. The idea that the US's adversaries are not themselves pursuing, you know, kill chains where humans are completely out of the loop. I think that the base assumption should be that that is happening, and it's a case of, well, okay, how should the U.S. respond given that assumption? Is that fair coming from a total layman who's getting new to this world? Is that like a reasonable, or would you kind of like challenge me on anything that I said there?
No, I think you're spot on. I think, we play by different rules than our adversaries across the board. Um, And because, I mean, I was having a discussion with somebody that they were arguing about that we have no free speech in America. And I'm like, well, look, I mean, it's better than a lot of other places, right? We have the goals that and the principles that we aspire to, and certainly there are ups and downs. But some of those are kind of inalienable uh, rights in the United States that we try to adhere to. Um, and yeah, and I think it makes it difficult when our adversaries are coming at this from a completely different perspective. Um, and some of it isn't even like the most obvious adversary. Sometimes it's just countries that have different appreciation. They have different priorities than we do. I mean, you know, America is about the individual first, and there are a lot of other countries that are about the nation first and the individual second. And you have to recognize that that leads to different trade-offs and different decision making. And you have to kind of, you know, choose, I guess, which one you align with more. No pun intended. Um, yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, that's great. I'm glad we got some time on that topic. Yeah, I'd love to move on now to, you spent some time in both of these worlds, and there are, I think, very few people who have spent time in both the AI alignment world and the government national security space. Yeah, what other hot takes do you have from both sides? Like, what advice would you give to maybe people who are kind of would consider only them, existing in the AI alignment space, or only in the national security space? What advice would you have to folks in these groups? Yeah, would love to get some kind of food for thought for folks on both of those
Sure.
sides.
So I'll start by, and then this will be my third time saying it, but again, national security is more than guns and bullets, right? National security includes our economic security, includes security of critical infrastructure. That's water, electricity, hospitals, like fundamental services in this country. So when you think about national security, don't just think about the wartime context. I would say to the folks that are on the national security side of the fence, and by that I mean the government, as well as a lot of these organizations are managed by the private sector. I say that it's you really need to listen to or pay more attention to those unbiased, more objective folks in the AI space that are not beholden to shareholders, to really get an understanding of what the true horizon looks like, and what is actually within the realm of capable, not just, again, this like blind focus on LLMs and the frontier labs, right? There's so much more than that. Um, so I think the folks on the national security side of the fence, again, they need to kind of expand their aperture. I'd also say to them, all of them, that compromising on security, it's, you save a few dollars today, but you will pay billions on the back end. I'm sure that there are lots of companies. I know for a fact that there are lots of companies, maybe even people who hear this podcast, will be like, yeah, I was doing all this amazing technology. And then I came in one day and then all my IP was stolen. And all of a sudden, all these companies from China are manufacturing the same thing that I had. And I tried to take them to international trade court and nothing happened because I can't prove it or the Chinese don't care. Like, or it costs me millions of dollars in legal fees to try to get some type of remediation, right? There are companies actually going through that right now. So I think that's a reality for people on the national security side of the fence, to really kind of start thinking more strategically and long term about what security and trustworthy, reliable, unbiased AI means to, your productivity and your long term endurance. I'd say to people in the alignment community, I think is, again, they need to think about national security as, again, not just guns and bullets. It's a lot more than that. And think about your daily life, all the things that you get to enjoy, right? Like, I mean, maybe you're living off grid, good for you. But, the roads that you drive on, the power that, allows you to connect all your gear to, the doctors and the hospitals that are there to help you in case of an emergency, that is all part of what you are trying to defend. And the baby steps that help get us to more secure and reliable AI in these types of contexts will ultimately build, I believe, that more broadly aligned system, right? Like you're gonna grow. I don't know. I view this as you're kind of like growing something. You're not actually like developing. Like I'm not like building a car, right? Like I'm growing something. I'm nurturing something. And if you can hit some of these benchmarks that are more near term, and I would also say applied, not just research, but figure out how to apply things. That's one of my it's kind of like a blessing and a curse, a frustration of mine, I would say, at DARPA, is that there were lots of millions and millions and millions of dollars invested into things, and we're only going to run them in a lab. And as soon as you put them in the real world, they fail. That's a huge waste of time and energy. And certainly the national security ecosystem, they welcome creative ideas, but you got to come with something productive. Um, and so that's what I would say to both parties. I think everybody's got the same goals. I mean, and it applies not to the US, but Latin America, Europe, Africa, like every country, I think, that wants to defend themselves. I mean, I say shit, even our adversaries, right? Like I'm sure they want to ensure reliable water and power too, right? It's in all of our interest to get to that point. And come wartime, or if you want to, not even war, but if you just want to like influence somebody else, you know what? I'm going to shut off your power for 72 hours. I'm going to make your port stop functioning for 48 hours. And let's see what happens to your supply chain internally. When nobody can get toilet paper, everybody's going to freak out, right? So it doesn't take a lot.
That played out
Actually,
before. Yeah, I don't know
yes.
if that's too soon, but yeah, it's been a while now, so maybe we can talk about the toilet paper problem.
I want some type of, I want you to sign some treaty for something. I'm going to flicker your lights on and mess with your economy a little bit to force you to come to the table on something completely different. That's how that's how intelligence works, roughly. And you want to make sure that you have positioned yourself and your teammates, if I could say that, to be resilient to that type of manipulation.
Yeah, yeah, I like the point you made about including adversaries, right? Like, sometimes we might talk about adversaries thinking about the kind of state level actors. It's also, worth noting the kind of goals of those state level actors might be different from the kind of individual people that live in these countries who probably, much like people in the US, generally just want to avoid war, and I don't know, like don't really want to spend their day to day thinking about this stuff. They want to, I don't know, hang out with their children, hang out with their friends, and just like have a good life. And the implications of aligned AI is the same to those folks as it is to folks in the US. And so it would be great from my perspective if the adversaries of the US are also thinking about aligned AI and the implications that will have on, both their national security and the kind of well-being of their, people in their country. I think this is, not just bipartisan, but also, you know, uh, it crosses lines of allegiances to something that all countries should be caring about. Because at the end of the day, if we, are getting into some of these AGI, ASI scenarios, this is something that we as humanity are going to be contending with together, whether we realize it or not right now. So yeah, I think that was a great point to kind of extend it to literally everyone. Yeah, this is literally
Yep.
something we think everyone should be caring about right now.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time coming on the podcast, Adriana. This is great. I'm sure we'll have
My
you back
pleasure.
in the future. If people want to learn more about the work that we do at AE, you should go to ae.studio/alignment. You can also reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. Would love to get in touch with folks. Thanks so much for listening, and look forward to you joining us next time.
Thanks, James.